When we started this process of doing this volume, Gunter had the idea for the sandwich president as the sort of motivating analogy for my chapter. And I thought that was a really great one because Tsai Ing-wen at the beginning to middle of her first term was very much sort of sandwiched in between, well, really in the middle of her term when we were talking about this, a resurgent blue camp and Cam Tea Party under the leadership of this apparently very exciting and promising figure, Han Kuo-yu, and the deep greens in her own party who were even trying to undermine her survival during her presidency by trying to get her to step down to promise not to be a candidate for the 2020 election almost a year before that election was supposed to happen. So, she really was, she was sandwiched between green and blue. She was sandwiched between the US and mainland China. Um, so it's a great metaphor. And then we get to the end of the first term and it's like, I don't know, she's no longer the sandwich. Now she's the pickle on the top. Everybody else is just piled up down below her and she is standing above everyone. So the chapter is still called The Sandwich President, but it really talks about the fall and rise of Tsai Ing-wen's presidency as a result of some very unexpected events, things that we just could not foresee, including, of course, Han Kuo-yu's implosion as a candidate in the presidential election, which maybe some people predicted, and there are probably people on this call who saw that coming in a way that most of us did not. But I certainly thought in late 2018, early 2019, that Han Kuo-yu was going to make a good showing in that 2020 presidential election. Another unexpected event that really altered the calculus in Taiwan's domestic politics that we talk about in the chapter is the Hong Kong crisis, which continues to influence Taiwan's domestic politics, although maybe in different ways. So the chapter, which covers the first term, is full of surprises. But then the second term, what has elapsed of President Tsai's second term has also been full of unexpected events. I was in Taiwan until March of 2020, so from September 19 to March of 2020. And I was working on a number of things, but there was one thing in particular that I was working on. I was trying to decide, should I mention this this epidemic that seems to be getting started? So I must have been having these thoughts in February, but I think I was still having them in March, which shows how slow I am. Should I mention this in what I'm writing, or is this going to be the kind of thing that in a couple of years, no one's going to remember it and people are going to say, what's she even talking about? What is this? Coronavirus? Instead, obviously, coronavirus has seized and paralyzed and beaten up the entire world ever since. So if I were going to say one domestic event that has not transformed, but heavily, heavily influenced the domestic political trajectory in Taiwan, it has to be COVID. And what we have seen is that Tsai Ing-wen has, on the whole, benefited from her government's management of the COVID pandemic. It has not been perfect and it has not been continuous. And you've seen how people have used the COVID crisis to try and sort of find openings to attack Tsai or to undermine or to criticize. And it looked as if in May of 2021 that maybe her sort of wall of protection was crumbling. And so there was this kind of upwelling from her critics, especially on the blue side, to say, you see, we told you she couldn't handle this. I think that is when they began to get the energy for referendums and for kind of, okay, we have another opportunity to take down Tsai Ing-wen. And it was a total strategic error on her critics' part, because in the end, although Taiwan did experience a wave of COVID infection in May of 2021, that wave they managed to contain it and roll it back and restore Taiwan to kind of the status quo ante of very low infection rates. So the COVID crisis, I think, has very much reinforced and strengthened Tsai and sort of given further weight to the assessment that she has been an effective leader. The Hong Kong crisis has kind of settled into a much more chronic rather than an acute phase. So while the Hong Kong crisis is no longer kind of front page news, in Taiwan, the management of Hong Kong refugees and Hong Kong people, asylum seekers, how to handle and how to understand Taiwan's responsibility relative to Hong Kong continues to be an issue that, and Isabel can talk about this, I hope, later. The whole migrant issue now has expanded to include Hong Kong refugees and asylum seekers. So that is an issue that I think animates more the civil society or social movement part of Taiwan's political spectrum, but it has been a challenge for Tsai. On the economic front, COVID has also been really good for Taiwan. Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has not been particularly good for Taiwan's economy, but I don't think it's necessarily a long-term negative effect. And again, I hope Doug can speak to this. But Taiwan has become a kind of the industries in which Taiwan is a global leader have elevated in importance as a result of the COVID pandemic. And finally, just to kind of step back onto the territory Carrie was in a moment ago, I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine has really grabbed the attention of Taiwanese people in a way that few things ever could, for adding some texture and weight to the argument that Tsai has been making since the beginning of her first term, that Taiwan really has to think about national security issues. And, this puts her, interestingly, it has always put her more onto the blue camp's territory. The blue camp has always been the sort of, heavyweight on security and strategic issues. And Tsai has really tried since 2016 to make inroads into that kind of discourse. And I think she was already making those inroads, but the invasion of Ukraine has suddenly put it in Taiwanese consciousness in a way that it has never been before, that these things can actually happen, that this, even if you think China is a paper tiger, even if it doesn't make sense to you why China would ever invade Taiwan, Ukrainians, right up until the final days, that President Zelensky was saying to the US, stop ginning up this hysteria. The Russians are not going to invade us. So, in many ways, I think Tsai is in a stronger position than ever before. But there is another piece to the sandwich, and that is the encroachment from the deep green side returns. Her second term ends in 2024. She is not eligible for another term of office. Her success and her strong approval and foundation at the moment means that the many people on the Green side and within the DPP are going to see the battle for the next administration being fought within the DPP itself, as the KMT is unlikely, for a variety of reasons that we can talk about if we want to, go from tragedy to farce. The KMT is unlikely, appears unlikely at this moment to be able to mount a serious campaign. So the question is, what happens within the DPP? And there, all of these trends have the possibility of inviting into office, or inviting at least into the competition, figures in Taiwan politics who are a lot less cautious, a lot less prudent, and a lot less realistic about Taiwan's situation than Tsai Ing-wen herself. So while I think, she is still the pickle on top of the sandwich and not the thin slice of American cheese not worth eating, squeezed into the middle, the coast is not clear either for for Tsai Ing-wen herself, for the DPP, or for Taiwan as a whole. History's not stopping, but I am. So thank you very much for your attention, and read the book.